And we're live. I got to come up with a good catchphrase of how to start these things off. Conducive with my personality and effective at doing a good introduction. Anyway, so I opened this up. A couple people may join, but I wanted to record some thoughts. Okay, so I've been talking of late of obviously the complexities of what's going on. Very top down, high level, grandiose, big picture, because that's unfortunately, maybe fortunately, the way I think. But I brought up a couple of names: Brent Johnson, obviously Peter Schiff, and people that agree with either one or the other. And what I find fascinating is that they're both right in all regards. Brent Johnson says the case, which is that there's a global margin call on tens, hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt. So there is a mad scramble, a rush to the dollar, which increases demand on the dollar, which means the value of the dollar goes up relative to other currencies. And sure, and that's his dollar milkshake theory. And that's absolutely what would play out. And let's go to the other side of the spectrum is Peter Schiff, who talks about countries abandoning the dollar because it's ridiculous. This whole system is ridiculous, and everyone would agree because it's not fair. The rich get richer, and everyone else barely budges. So abandoning the dollar would be the gold play. So that's Peter Schiff. Thinks gold's going to go to the moon, dollar's going to go to zero. Brent Johnson, there's going to be a demand like nothing in history for the dollar. Dollar's going to go to the moon. I contemplate, I process, I digest information, and I come up with my own ideas and conclusions. I like both those ideas. I like both those theories, and a thought has been going through my mind about one thing that's undeniable and has always been the case: U.S. arrogance and narcissism. We've heard on TV the president say, "This is our money. We can do what we want." We've heard other politicians say, "Debt is not a problem." And these are two statements that are completely consistent with what's called MMT, modern monetary theory, where the inflation is not managed by productivity. It is completely controlled by the printing press. And it is my understanding, after digesting an ample amount of information over the last couple of days and weeks, that this is the only solution, because if the dollar goes to the moon, other sovereign currencies are destroyed. If the dollar goes to zero, the US dollar loses its place as anything meaningful. And the whole US global, the US dollar as a reserve currency is history. So that both those, sure, they make sense in theory, but the US and government and politicians, nobody wants that. Maybe other countries want that, but the US doesn't want that. So what toolkit option does the US have? And that's called modern monetary theory, which is basically what we just saw play out. The Federal Reserve being merged with the US Treasury, more or less. SPVs in the Treasury, so the Federal Reserve can access markets that they were not able to. And all we need is a sign from Congress that they're on board with ramping up SPVs, so the Fed has a way to distribute money to every corner of any market that it possibly needs to get money to alleviate the global margin call. Fascinating. So what does that mean? The margin call is occurring, which means trillions and tens of trillions and hundreds of trillions of dollars are needed in so many sectors and so many places on the planet. So the demand is there, and that means the dollar rose, and that's exactly what happened about a week ago. But it came down because the Fed got its swap lines, which is basically central banks around the world have access to the swap line. They could transfer their or borrow dollars in denominated, or borrow dollars using their currencies, their sovereign currency. And that relieved the pressure on the dollar. So then the dollar goes down. But that, as Brent Johnson thinks, and I agree, it's not even a drop in the bucket. Margin shortfall on just one tiny OTC derivatives market sure as hell isn't tiny. That's the gorilla in the room. But point being, that's a tiny part of the amount of systems completely crumbling with regard to the amount of dollar-denominated debt that they have. So eventually what happens is the margin call overwhelms the availability of dollars, driving the price through the roof no matter what kind of availability is made vis-a-vis the swap lines. So how does the U.S. respond with this arrogance and narcissism and what they've done? Modern monetary theory. Turning on the Treasury printing press. Completely 100% per the core tenet of MMT is control over inflation vis-a-vis the printing press. So if the dollar demand goes, how do you push the value of the dollar down? You print money. But we're not talking about the printing of money that people hear on the media and what people may think it is. We're not talking about money available at the Fed level. We're talking about money, base money, real money, printed money at the Treasury M1 level, which is not much right now. It's about, well, after the bailout package that was just passed, it's about $4.6 trillion. That's all the money there is, period. The whole ball game. So keep an eye on news, keep an eye on Congress, keep an eye on the Fed and the Treasury reports for acronyms, 3-letter, 4-letter, 5-letter acronyms for programs and policies that they create to distribute money to places globally that have a margin call shortfall. And the Treasury, I have put a link in the description for the Treasury weekly reports, how much they're printing. We could monitor it. I'm going to expect 5, 10, 15, 20 trillion at some point. MMT is basically the printing press controls everything. They could buy all debts. It doesn't matter. It's on the books of the government. It doesn't matter if it defaults because the Treasury can just print. The Treasury could also destroy, which means the Treasury is in complete control over the value of the dollar relative to foreign currencies. You want to increase it, you destroy. You want to decrease it, you print. In theory, MMT sounds fascinating, and that's why it's a theory, a monetary theory. It's MMT. But shit, that is the furthest thing from sound money. And that's what all gold bugs will mention, sound money. And that's what crypto or decentralized UTXO quantity capped blockchains are, sound money. So in fact, the US, in my opinion, is going directly towards the polar opposite of sound money, which is no limits, print and destroy on demand. Absolutely fascinating, absolutely disturbing, absolutely real. As the US Treasury prints money to compensate for the margin shortfall globally, using whatever 4-letter acronym the Fed comes up with next to distribute the money to the 4 corners of the planet, there's more money in circulation, which combined with supply disruption, if not complete breakdown in many sectors, leads to more money chasing less supply, which means inflated prices for goods and services. Most goods and services have a complete breakdown. Clearly, yeah. I wonder how many iPhones they're making. So I have no idea what's going to play out in the vast majority of the market. My primary thought nowadays is survivalism. Like, what is the bare minimum of a direction that things are going to head? And to me, that comes back to consumer staples, food and services and transportation and logistics. We're going to have a rise. Well, frankly, the Treasury's in control, so I don't know what's going to play out. I know it's going to be completely manipulated, and then manipulated with hopefully good intent to control the inflated price of goods and services, especially the ones that people need. There is damn well a reason the bailout only included $1,200 per person, because if they flood the market, flood people's accounts with dollars, that totally destabilizes supply and demand balance more than they can't give more. There's not enough supply to meet demand, and all of a sudden people have money to maintain or increase demand, or it's all about balance. And it is quite disheartening, because from a humanitarian perspective, clearly people need money to buy goods and services. So you have two sides to that coin: the humanitarian concept, but also the monetary concept. If the monetary concept fails, there's a humanitarian crisis on the other end of that as well. Obviously, it's kind of just a triple-edged sword. So it's like a double-edged sword, but worse. I don't entirely know how things are going to play out in many regards, but I know we are unstable. I know they're going towards MMT. They're going to want to control the dollar, because they're going to want to prevent the destruction of pretty much every other currency on the planet. They want to maintain their status as the global reserve currency, and that is obvious. It is what it is. I am not making any plays on the market with regard to this realization, this observation of the way things are going to play out. I think there's potentially huge plays with regard to collapsing real estate. Home builders are going to be destroyed. The interesting thing is banks. The Fed is moving credit card debt, mortgage-backed securities, and just all this garbage onto their balance sheet. So the banks have been bailed out with regard to that. But there's a lot of money that the banks are on the hook for with regard to margin calls, with regard to oil swaps, and other types of betting, or other types of hedging that they do. So I'm unsure how banks are going to play out, but it's worrisome, because when a bank approaches illiquidity, insolvency, pretty much the status quo policy is a bail-in process, where debts that they owe can be canceled. And basically, the primary debt that they owe is depositors' accounts. You put money in a bank, your money isn't in the bank. It's a debt that the bank owes you. They've already spent your money. They already lent it to someone else to generate a return on investment. That's fundamentally the fractional reserve banking system. So a lot of instability. There's a lot of money that a lot of people are going to make. But my bet, I think we're going to have stagflation. They're going to try and control inflated consumer staple prices, but in combination with unemployment rates, 30, 40, 50%. If there is even a hint of inflated consumer staple prices, that is completely consistent with the definition of stagflation. And that is a brutal, Wikipedia that bad boy. It's brutal, stagflation. So my bet is the government, very consistent with MMT theory, they're going to print trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. They're going to ramp it up 10 to 1 at the Fed level for 10 to 1 leveraged action. And they're going to push for a massive, quote unquote, massive, exclamation point, little fiery emoji, little bomb next to it, massive, not stimulus. They're going to do an infrastructure spending bill that's going to put every country on this planet in awe. Did they really just print $20 trillion? That's what every country is going to say, because with that quantity of unemployment, beats the pants off the Great Depression, the system is shut down. The amount of unemployment is going to be absolutely disturbing, disheartening. Anyway, so infrastructure spending, what better reason to do it? And we already have the policies in place to do it. And we actually have a reason to do it, because by printing, we're going to prevent the destruction of every other sovereign fiat currency around the planet. So can you imagine $10 trillion at the Treasury level, 10-to-1 leverage at the Fed level, a $200 trillion infrastructure spending bill. For what purpose? Rebuild every bridge in the country, do everything. We're talking about everything, like next generation United States. And I find that notion fascinating. Out of the ashes of a destroyed financial system comes something good. And for that very reason, I'm disturbed. I have a lot of anxiety about what's going on, but I also have a lot of excitement, because when a country is backed into a corner, it does radical things. So why would they do this infrastructure concept? Narcissistic, arrogant country compensate that they take an action, just like what they're going to do with MMT at the Treasury level. They're going to print. So they're going to print, funnel that money into a means of employing the people that are out of work, because they want to control unemployment. Let's employ 30 million people to rebuild the country. You can imagine what's going to go on in the news media, the press. It's going to sound like glory days. Holy wow. They came up with they're doing incredible things. And that's exactly the way the spin is going to be presented, as something incredible that's being done for this country. We had a horrible tragedy, and they're doing this wonderful thing. And yes, and it is wonderful. It would be wonderful. It is wonderful. It's nothing. It'd be incredible. I'm in awe thinking about it. But if you talk to fundamental crypto blockchain enthusiasts, as well as gold bugs, it's the opposite of sound money policy. And that means it's controversial. Incredible, yet controversial. So what else do they have to do besides the nationalization of employment and the world's largest historic infrastructure spending bill? It's repatriation of supply chain, because we can't trust anyone any longer. Trust has been lost. Trust is momentum. Once momentum is broken, it's very difficult to reattain, which means you have to pursue alternatives. And completely consistent with the nationalization of employment, the infrastructure spending bill is the repatriation of supply chains. If we're going to build out an infrastructure in the United States, why not build out mining for critical materials? Why not build out manufacturing? Why not take everything to the next level? Now that we're in control of the printing press, the Fed and the Treasury merged, we have enough money to do and build anything. And all we have to do is manage inflation, manage the dollar value relative to other currencies, and that's MMT. We're in control. Not sound money is what it is. Phoenix stuff. Yes, indeed. Cool. Well, it's inevitable. I think the technology is available to do incredible things. John. Yeah, that's my little one, my 1.5-year-old. Dada, dada. She knows a couple of words, but her favorite word is mama, dada. Repatriation is a good idea. Well, listen, a lot of people are talking about repatriation of supply chain. I think these things are obvious, because not only are they sellable in the media, they're a solution to the problems the country has. They're consistent with the necessity to print. So if you have to print to prevent the destruction of foreign sovereign fiat, this is where you spend the money. Instead of putting it in people's pockets, you got to get them to work to maintain productivity, because otherwise you got ridiculous demand, the destroyed supply chain, and then you have inflation for consumer staples. Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily, John. It's complicated. I don't know how it's going to play out with regard to taxation, because it gets complicated. For right now, my brain has digested the reality that the Treasury is going to have to unleash printing to devalue the dollar index so other countries' fiat notes doesn't get destroyed. That's where my mind's at. And then the question becomes, if they're printing $20 trillion Treasury level and 10-to-1 leverage at the Fed level, what the hell do you do with all the money? You can't give it to people, because if you give it to people, you have demand through the roof and there's no supply to meet the demand, which is going to cause inflation. So and if 30, 40, 50% of the country is out of work in 6 months in a year, because all restaurants, small business restaurants nationwide are out of business in 2-3 months. And amongst other things, the U.S. shale oil industry is completely collapsing. It's not profitable to pump and make oil and refine oil in the U.S. anymore. $15 a barrel. Canadian oil is negative. So how do you get this? What do? You need the employment. You have a shitload of money. Employ the crap out of people. Rebuild the country. We need to rebuild the country anyway. The infrastructure is dilapidated. So it makes perfect sense in many regards. Oh, Texas, it's going to be horrible. This is going to be brutal. But as Amanda says, from the ashes, incredible things rise. The only thing that has me worried is MMT is completely untested, period. No one's ever done it. It makes conceptual, logical sense, but we are putting the faith in government yet again to manage money and to an extent that's never been done before in history. Look what they did the last time. This shit show is because of them. Starting in 1971, the second you got off the gold standard, absolutely ridiculous what's happened the last 40 years, 50 years. Yes, exactly. We need to rebuild the country anyway, and we're going to print whatever trillions of dollars, and you can't just give it to people. People are going to need jobs, so put them to work, rebuild the country, ramps up productivity, which means demand and supply balance rather than imbalance. If you just give people money and there's no productivity, you're going to have to maintain taxation, I think, because that's just part of a balancing effect that'll give what could be said as like negative feedback, additional feedback. Instead of just having the Treasury completely in control over monetary value, the dollar index, why not have additional feedback mechanics? So I think taxation is obviously historically a way to achieve that. Anyway, I just wanted to jump on and say these things because I've had these ideas over the last couple of days. Brent Johnson's dollar milkshake theory, and Peter Schiff, gold bug, but he's extremely smart and clear, and it's logical. At some point, everyone's going to drop this garbage fiat currency and go to sound money, which is exactly enter crypto, blockchain technology. Listen, I think that it's complicated, and there's a couple of interesting things that could play out. Frankly, we're talking about morale. We're talking about the likelihood, short term, of fear and instability and riots. There's a reason we've seen the National Guard roll out everywhere, and there's a reason this past Friday, either the reserves or the military called retirees to not enlist, but get them to active duty. We're locked up for a long time. A vaccine does nothing. A vaccine is designed to, the whole purpose of a vaccine is to facilitate herd immunity. But we know nothing about the virus. It's a brand new virus. There's over 500 strains already of it due to mutation just in the United States. Look at the flu. You need a new vaccine every year because every year there's the mutation. So the same concept and principle applies to this virus. They present on news media, what is it, national end of April? No, they're placating. They're trying to keep everyone calm, cool, collected. And they're going to lose control of that when they have to extend it to May. And then they have to extend it to June. They have to extend it to July. As of right now, there is no opening the system. Believe me, the second I see a way for the system to stabilize from a top down, big picture perspective, I'll state something and I'll feel relieved. I don't see it right now. Everyone is stuck at home. The second you open the system, you threaten the hospital system and overrunning it. And you got to remember, the second you open the system, the hospital system doesn't immediately overrun. What happens is it spreads, and the incubation period 2-3 weeks. So before you know it, you have complete. If you let 10 million people out of quarantine, and it spreads worse than it did last time, and all of a sudden you got 10 million people, say 75% infection, and 3 weeks later they're all sick. So you can't let people out of quarantine. We're talking about a pandemic that hasn't occurred in modern times, period. So you're talking about the doctors, the smartest doctors in the world are literally turning their ideas and realities of biology into political theory about how to even potentially proceed. There's no precedence. There's no known course of action. It's all experimentation. Try and see what the hell happens. Yeah, no, it will. It's inevitable. You guys should know that. It just is. And it scares me. It disappoints me. I wish the politicians were more transparent, that they have no idea what the hell is going on, but they have the smartest people. Bring up the smartest people. Bring up the brains to talk about their ideas, much like I am digesting the information I see and I'm sharing it. Where are the smartest people? What are their ideas? Where are the genius doctors? It's ridiculous. Listen, I'm not smart, relatively speaking. I know smart people. Smart people is someone that goes to MIT and gets a triple major and never studied a day in his life, and he just processes everything. And those types of people are out there. A lot of them. The think tanks, government think tanks, the government agencies that get the kids that get recruited at school because they don't need an education. That's the type of people that are available. And I'm inclined to think that's the type of people that are doing what hopefully is being done. But where's the damn transparency? Politics is ridiculous. It's absolutely horrible. If anyone has any last thoughts, I've been instructed to terminate this video in a timely fashion. Yeah, the smartest people are not the ones in charge. And that is painfully, disappointingly obvious. Yeah, should be looking for treatments. You talk about policy. You talk about CDC policy. You're talking about the various processes that go into getting a drug available to the masses, and that's not 5 minutes. That's not 6 months. That's probably not a year. You don't want to kill people. Frankly, you can't kill people because then the drug gets pulled and it's a failed experiment. One moon. So, well, we'll know soon enough. What, 12 to 18 months? Frankly, in my opinion, we follow stock to flow. Plan B. Bottom line is, I think that's what my position boils down to. Straight up stock to flow. And if that fails, then that's disappointing. But my gut My opinion is that stock to flow is a historical precedence and observation about the stock to flow relationship between the availability of inventory and the price, the associated price. Supply and demand rules. Mitigate. There's only one way to mitigate the spread of the virus. It's lock everyone down. That's it. All right. I wanted to get a video out. I need to talk. Noah talks. I'll be on. Anyone feel welcome to ping me? I'm happy to chat about anything. Y'all have a good day. Cheers.